Colin Powell once said, "There are no secrets to success. It's the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure." And we couldn't agree more. This is Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. We'll talk to people from all walks of life and pick their brains about their journey, the process, and the ups and downs to becoming successful. You want inspiration and motivation? It all starts here. This is the Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. And now your host, Kyle Sullivan.
What's going on, champions? Welcome to another episode of Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. Today, we have an episode that I am extremely excited for. Mr. Grant Baldwin, nationally known speaker, podcaster, and author, who's helped thousands of people start and build their own speaking businesses through his training company, The Speaker Lab. Regularly featured at national media, Forbes, Entrepreneur, Huffington Post. He's also a fellow podcaster since 2014 with over 400 episodes. He's the author of an incredible book called The Successful Speaker, showing the 5 simple yet highly effective steps to sharing your message as a paid speaker to build your platform. Outside of professional life, he loves things speaking, entrepreneurship, marketing, family, motivating other leaders and entrepreneurs. Lives in Nashville, Tennessee with his wife and 3 daughters. Grant, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Kyle, thanks for letting me hang out with you, man. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. Well, man, first and foremost, we got the receipts. You've been in your industry for quite some time, but who's Grant behind the bio?
Yeah, I think Grant behind the bio is really tied up in that last line. So I'm married to my high school sweetheart. We've got 3 daughters. So it's me and a house full of women. It's the absolute best. And so, man, I love entrepreneurship. I love speaking. I love podcasting. I love, being a business owner and leading teams and that sort of thing. But I mean, at the end of the day, my most important roles are being a good husband and being a good father. And so if I drop the ball on everything else, but I nail it with my girls, then I'm in good shape. But if it's, the opposite is true, where I'm crushing it in business, but I'm dropping the ball at home, like I've really screwed up. So, the most important roles and the big priority for me is being good at home.
That's awesome, man. How old are your daughters?
They are 16, 14, and 11. So, I think, I think when as a guy, I always wanted like a little dude, and then, you end up with all girls. And I got to tell you, girls are a blast. They are a ton of fun. And real quick, I was just like, oh wait, this is way better than boys. Cause we got some good friends, neighbors, a couple houses down. We go hang with them. They got all boys, and you go over there, it's just loud and it's smelly and it's a mess. You come over here, it's like this tranquil little spa with me and my ladies. And like, they're always cuddled up to daddy and want hugs and affection. And so, yeah, it's being a girl dad is the absolute best.
That's awesome, man. I have a 3-year-old little girl and a 1-year-old son. So we got both worlds now. And we got, we joke, we got 3 kiddos. Our daughter is 3, our business is 2.5. And our son is 1. And we have commonality going through your book, man. We both were youth pastors. Mm-hmm. And so how long ago was that? And man, talk about that beginning of that story that you shared. I'll let you do it. But man, when you realized, holy crap, I want to do this for a living.
Yeah. And so if we go way back in high school, I was really involved in my local church. My youth pastor had a big impact in my life. And I was like, I want to do that. Like, that seems like a cool profession. And it just really resonated with me, and kind of felt like if I can make the kind of impact and difference in others' lives that he made in my own life, that my youth pastor made in my life, like that just seemed super, super fulfilling, rewarding. And so that was kind of the path I was on. I went to Bible college. I was youth pastor at a church for a little while. And there are parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't like, but like the one thing I really enjoyed was speaking. And so I had a lot of opportunities to speak to students on, Sunday school and midweek service stuff. And then every so often I got to speak on the weekend in big church. And so I just like the more I spoke, the more like I enjoyed it. I felt like I was decent. I got good feedback from people. And so I felt like there was something there. And so the church I was on staff at, and Kyle, I think you'll understand and resonate with this. Like, again, there are certainly parts of it I like, but I mean, being on staff, being in ministry is just, it's a hard gig in a lot of different ways. And I remember one of the big challenges for me was I always felt like I was on. It's not like you clock in and clock out. I mean, you're just always on, you're always available, you're always accessible. And it was kind of taking a toll on me mentally. And And then I'd say the workplace culture was not the healthiest. Unfortunately, the lead guy that I worked for was not the best person to work for. And so it just kind of led me going like, dang, is this what ministry is like? Like, I talked with a bunch of other buddies from Bible college, that sort of thing. And some of them had similar experiences. And so it just kind of led me going like, okay, what do I want to do? And so, my wife was pregnant with our first child. She was 4 or 5 months pregnant. And ultimately we made the decision to resign this position that we had at this church. And I didn't really have anything else lined up. There was no grand plan. I had a lot of like well-meaning, well-intentioned friends and family who were like, hey man, you know, your wife's pregnant with your first kid and you just left your stable career. Like, have you thought this through? And I was like, I thought I did, but yeah, you raised some valid points. And so, so for the next probably 9 months or so, I worked like some odd jobs, kind of a hodgepodge of different stuff. I worked for a security company, selling like door-to-door security systems. I worked at a couple different restaurants as a server. I'm just kind of like trying to make ends meet and piece together, some type of income. But during that time, I'm kind of like wandering in the desert aimlessly. Like I really did a lot of trying to think through like, what do I want to do? What is it that I'm good at? What do I enjoy? What do the next several years of life look like? And the thing I kept coming back to is speaking. And so I wanted to be a speaker, but then you're like, how does that work? And who hires speakers? And what do you speak about? And how much do you charge? And it's just kind of this mysterious world. And so I started learning some stuff and booked a couple gigs. And over the next several years, booked more and more gigs. Got to a point where I was doing about 60, 70 paid speaking gigs a year. And so speaking was the world that I was just like, and this is it. Let's go all in on this. And so, since leaving the church world, I've been in the speaking game ever since. So the past, 17 years or so.
I love that, Greg. And talk about the moment in the 4-H where you talked to the.
Yeah.
So I resonated so much with that because about 2.5 years ago, I got the first like out of ministry, like paid speaking.
Yeah. Gig. Yeah.
And so talk about that because that hit me right off the jump of your book.
Yeah, hit you on the feels. So I was, so I had resigned from this position, and then again, you just kind of wandering in the desert, figuring out what I want to do. Made the decision like, okay, I want to be a speaker, and then I kind of like, I'm just trying to book gigs, because all the speaking I had done up until that point had been pretty much in the church world, and so I booked my first gig. We were living in Missouri at the time. I live in the Nashville area now, but we were living in Missouri, and booked this gig for the Missouri 4-H, like some small conference, and 4-H, if people aren't familiar with, is kind of like a leadership group for teenagers, for high school students, primarily around like agricultural. It's a lot of students from like rural areas. I grew up in suburban world. Like I knew squat about this. I was like, I don't know anything about cows or growing corn or anything like this. Like, what am I going to bring to the table? But I knew like, okay, I can do this. And so I go to this event. And I spoke for, 30, 45 minutes or so, give this keynote. I spent a ton of time practicing, going over it time and time again. And I finished up, I got a standing ovation, got a lot of good feedback, and students and parents coming up, oh, that was really awesome. Got good feedback from the event planner. The event planner hands me a check for $1,000. And I remember like going to my car in the parking lot and just sitting down and just like breaking down in tears. I was just like, I cannot believe they just gave me $1,000 to like stand up there and run my mouth. And it was just like such a rewarding, fulfilling feeling. And I mean, it was, at the time, like $1,000 was like $1 billion. It was just an astronomical amount of money for where we were at in life. And so it was just like, man, I really want to do this. And I mean, literally like since then I've been in the speaking business, either being a speaker or helping other speakers have that same experience. So, I think what was so powerful for me from that moment, and perhaps why it resonated with you, Kyle, and it's a big thing we talk about internally within the Speaker Lab, our company, and working with speakers, is I think about it like dominoes, and like you push that first domino, and for me, like I did that gig, and it's just this massive boost of confidence of like, oh, hot dang, like I can do this, like it's going to take a lot of work, but it's just like this glimpse of I can make this happen. I'm decent at it. There's potential here. And so today, like at the Speaker Lab, when we help speakers book that first gig and they're like, holy crap, I can do this. You're like, yes. Like, again, it just pushes those dominoes that boost confidence. So yeah, that first gig was very, very instrumental for me.
I'm glad you went there, man, because when I went through your book, I was like, Oh, I remember that. Like getting that first one and just, woo, it means something. And so thank you for going there. Now, as people are listening to this and they go, okay, I know how you guys started. You said, hey, I want to transition out of this, go into this, got the first gig, got the check. I want to do this 17 years. Man, what should I speak about? What should I do to get started? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So this is a big, like today when we work with speakers, this is one of the biggest challenges is because when we talk with speakers, there's two key questions you got to answer. You got to be clear on who do you speak to? What problem do you solve? Who do you speak to? What problem do you solve? And for a lot of speakers, we just enjoy speaking. Speaking is a lot of fun. And so, sometimes I'll ask speakers, like, who do you speak to? And they're like, I don't know, man. I speak to people. I speak to humans. My message is for everybody, right? And then the same is true with like, well, what do you speak about? And sometimes speakers are like, well, what do you want me to speak about? I can speak about anything. I talk about, faith or family or business or entrepreneurship or sales or marketing or sports or hobby, like on and on the list goes. And the reality is like, no, like that doesn't work. And so, we tell speakers all the time that you want to be the steakhouse and not the buffet, the steakhouse, not the buffet, meaning, Kyle, if you and I we're looking for a good steak, like we have a choice. We could go to a buffet where steak is one of 100 things that they offer and they're all mediocre. Or you could go to a steakhouse where they do one thing, but they do that one thing really, really, really well, right? They don't do tacos. They don't do lasagna. They don't do pasta. They don't do seafood. They don't do cupcakes. They do steak and that's it. And so a steakhouse isn't sitting around going, yeah, but how do we, how should we create a bakery and how do we appeal to vegetarians? Like, no, like we're a steakhouse. This is what we do. And it's counterintuitive, but the more narrow, the more focused you are, the easier it is to attract the right type of customers, clients, and gigs that you could be speaking at. So for me, early on, where I'm going like, okay, I want to be a speaker. Now what? One of the best places to start is like, what do you already know? What are your experience? What is your connections? What are you familiar with? What are you comfortable with? And so for me, like, I came from youth ministry. Like I enjoyed speaking to students. I didn't want to go speak to their parents necessarily or go talk to an older audience. I wanted to keep speaking to students. And so, so that's where early on I was like, let's double down here. This is a ton of fun. There's opportunities for speaking in the youth market and that can look a lot of different ways. But yeah, that's ultimately what I decided to double down on and focus on.
I think that's so impactful because we oftentimes think it, and I called it the pastor problem when I got started because I was trying to be all things to all people.
Yeah.
And I was like the vanilla ice of coaches, consultants, speaker, like, the problem, I solve it. Like, was me. And I love that you, like, once I narrowed down to a niche, then I was able to actually gain some traction because as Donald Miller says, like, if you confuse, you lose, but clarity is king. And so I love that. It's super practical.
But see, like, let me piggyback on that for a second. Like, and again, this isn't exclusive to just speakers. This is anything, So any type of like business coaching, consulting podcast that you want to do, you got to be clear, like, who is this for? Like, where does this fit? And again, the tendency is we have this scope creep of, I wanted to appeal to as big and broad of an audience as possible. So let me give you an example or an analogy. So let's imagine, Kyle, like, God forbid you had some type of brain issue, right? And you got to go, let's say you had to have brain surgery. So you have a choice. You could go to your local family medical doctor. They're a doctor. They went to med school. They probably know more about the brain than you or I do. They may have done a few minor surgeries here and there, but they've never done brain surgery. Or you can go to a brain surgeon where like day in, day out, that's what they do. If you got a bad cough, you don't go to them. If you break your arm, you don't go to them. If you got the Rona, you don't go to them. But if you need brain surgery, like that's who you go to. I'm really good at one specific thing. And again, like we get it when it comes to these other contexts, but for some reason we think whenever it comes to being a speaker or an author or a podcaster or an entrepreneur or a business owner or whatever it may be, they were like, no, but I can do this and I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. And like, again, all of a sudden you become like this cheesecake factory that has just like dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of items versus like, no, like we do this. And like, if we're a steakhouse and if you're looking for steak, we're really, really good at it. And if you don't want steak, that's totally fine. We are happy to point you other resources or directions. But by focusing down, it actually, again, makes it easier. You say, oh, you need brain surgery? I got the person you need to talk to. Or you looking for a good steakhouse? Got it. Here's where you need to go. Versus just trying to be all things for all people.
Yes and amen. Yes. We about to have church for speakers that year.
Come on now. Somebody.
So you want to be a speaker, you narrow it down, and then you start reaching out and someone says, okay, what do you charge? How do you figure that out? How do you go, okay, Here's what I charge. How do you get confidence in saying it? Talk about that.
Yeah. So, it's a tough question because it's kind of a much more of an art than a science. Now, I'll give you a shortcut answer, and then I'll give you kind of the long answer. Right? So people ask all the time, like, how much should I charge as a speaker? And again, the answer is it depends, which is a horrible answer. That doesn't help anybody. And so we put together a free speaking fee calculator. And so if you go to myspeakerfee.com, it's totally free. You can answer, it's like 10 questions, multiple choice questions, and it'll spit out a number for you at the bottom of what you should charge. Now, again, it's much more of an art than a science. It'll at least get you in the ballpark, give you something to go off of. So that's the specific shortcut answer. Go to myspeakerfee.com. Now, what goes into that calculator behind the scenes, right? And kind of figuring something up. One of the factors is going to be your industry. You can charge more in some industries versus others. You can charge more speaking to corporations than you can to churches. You can charge more speaking to colleges than you could to elementary schools. It's not that one's better or worse than the other, but they're all different. They all have different scales of what they're used to and kind of fee ranges that they are used to paying. So that's going to be a factor. Industry is going to be a factor. Another factor is going to be your marketing materials. So your website, your demo video, like whether we like it or not, people judge books by their cover. So you want to make sure that your stuff looks sharp, it looks professional. Now, that doesn't mean you need to have spent tens of thousands of dollars on your marketing materials, but if an event planner or decision maker is considering hiring you, most likely they're not looking at you in isolation. They're looking at you and 2 or 3 or 4 other speakers. And so you want to make sure that, again, your stuff looks sharp. If you're the best speaker, but you have the worst website and the crappiest video and, there's typos, or it's just unprofessional or sloppy or anything like that, then it's just hard for people to take you seriously. So you just want to make sure that your stuff looks sharp and professional. Another variable and factor is going to be your experience. If you're a brand new speaker just getting started, you're probably not as good of a speaker as someone who's been doing this for 10 years and is probably, frankly, just a better communicator, right? So again, there's a bunch that goes into it. So again, the shortcut is definitely go check out myspeakerfee.com, and that'll get you pointed in the right direction.
So when you were transitioning from youth ministry to, okay, I'm going to double down on students, and then as it started to grow, how did you position yourself going, okay, I got all this experience speaking in this lane.
Yep.
Now I want to do this lane.
Yep.
How did you communicate the commonalities and position yourself as an authority, even though it was a fairly new lane you were running?
Yeah, that's a good question. So specifically, like, part of the question here is, like, I came from like a faith background, and you really kind of have you have the choice of, like, do you want to do more like faith-based speaking and speaking at, churches and youth groups and camps and retreats and that sort of thing, or you want to do like non-church stuff, more, secular schools, student leadership conferences, colleges, that sort of thing, right? There's pros and cons with both of them. I made a decision real quick to say, hey, I want to focus on schools, focus on student leadership conferences. And the way I always thought about it was, I never want to position myself as a Christian speaker as much as a speaker who happens to be a Christian. And so the reason being is a few different reasons. One was the number of opportunities and the budgets that they were working with, frankly. So it's not like speaking at a church versus speaking at a school, like a school is going to pay astronomically more. No, it's not like that. It's like marginally better. But I knew that for having been a youth pastor, understanding the limitations of churches and budgets and that sort of thing, like, I knew several friends, like in the church world, who would go speak at, let's say a weekend retreat or a week's worth of camp, and they'd get paid, like $500 or $1,000 or something, which again is not nothing, but for the amount of time that's involved, it's just like, dang, that's a big deal. Or I could go do a school assembly, one school assembly for $1,000 or a couple of $1,000, So some of it was just from like a financial standpoint, it just made more sense. And so I will say this, it's really, really hard to market to both because both sides make each other nervous, right? A principal is not like, man, I don't want a youth pastor coming in and like all of a sudden have this Holy Ghost moment, and then I'm getting calls from the district or something. Like, you don't want to do that. But at the same time, like, a youth pastor is going like, I don't want some secular speaker to come in and give some leadership pep talk. Like, I want them to talk about Jesus, So like they both make each other nervous. So I was like in my bio, I mentioned like I mentioned I was a youth pastor, but it wasn't like this prominent thing that I was talking, because again, I'm trying to get booked at schools and student leadership conferences. Now, there are times where like I might get booked by a principal or an event planner for a student leadership conference, and they're like, "Hey, I saw you used to be a youth pastor. Can you come speak to our youth group, or can you do this other thing, for FCA or something like that?" It's like, yeah, that's not a problem. This was kind of a byproduct of stuff that I was trying to book already. But that's kind of how I thought about it, and kind of the approach that I took was that, yeah, even though my career had been as a youth pastor, and I'd never been a teacher, I'd never been an administrator, I've never taught in a school, anything like that. I knew the thing I was good at was connecting with teenagers and connecting with students, and connecting with an audience and speaking. And so, so some of it was like, I'll tell you one other thing real quick. Something that helped me a lot was having come from the church world where I had given a lot of talks and presentations. There's this mental like hurdle or disconnect for me of just like, how are you supposed to go speak at a school or student leadership conference and not talk, like not everybody turn in your Bible, like, so what, like, how does that work? And so there's a good friend of mine who's a youth speaker, and he invited me to come watch him speak at some event. There's some like secular student leadership event or something. And he was actually a former youth pastor, and he gave like this 30, 45 minute talk or something. Didn't say Jesus, didn't reference the Bible or anything, but like, it was a great sermon just without scripture, And so it was just kind of like this, like, oh, okay, now I can picture what this is like, and that kind of helped connect the dots for me. But yeah, like my experience was working with students and speaking. And so it was it was less of a stretch, in practicality than it was in my mind to speak to, like in schools and student leadership events.
Yeah, I love that. It was a great sermon without the scripture.
Yeah.
I love that. So what are ways that people can seek out, find those event planners or meeting organizers? What are some ways that, if they're just getting started, maybe they not trying to go full time, just want to get, feet wet, get a few opportunities. How can people start to do that?
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple thoughts here. One is that, one of the great things about speaking is it can be what you want it to be. Meaning like there are speakers that I know that do, 100 plus gigs a year, and there's speakers that do 5 gigs a year. It's not that one's better or worse than the other. Everybody watching or listening is, for some of you, you may want to do this all in. You want to maybe be completely full time. And for some of you, you may, maybe you are a youth pastor and you're like, I've got a commitment already. I've got a full-time gig, but I wouldn't mind doing a couple things here and there. And I'm just trying to figure out how do I find those. So one is to be clear, like there's not a right or wrong answer of how much you want to be doing. But I will say that the results that you're expecting, there's going to be a real correlation to the effort that you put into it. You cannot put in hobby effort and expect professional results. It just doesn't work like that. That'll preach, right? Come on now. And like, that's the reality of like some speaker. And again, this isn't exclusive to just speakers, but this is true with like podcasters or business owners or authors or whatever it may be, that if you're just dabbling in it and you're like, man, why am I not successful as such and such over there? It's like, probably because they got a much bigger, focus and effort and energy that goes into it. It's kind of like if you, let's say, for example, like I wanted to get in shape, but I don't want it to be jacked, and I'm spending, 30 minutes a week in the gym, and I'm like, oh man, why does that guy look so much better and stronger than me? It's like, well, because he's here, like he's doing the work, he's showing up on a daily basis, and he's committed to it. It's not just like I'm sticking my toes in and I'm hoping to get, professional results. Like it doesn't work like that. So it's important to note that. But as far as like, how do you actually book gigs? What do you actually do at the end of the day? I think the important thing is that you have a system and a process. So just thinking like, I think it'd be kind of cool to be a speaker. And then just like sitting back and waiting for the phone to ring or an email to come in or an inquiry to happen, like that's not a plan at all. That doesn't work. And so you got to be much more proactive. So that's where I think it's good to start with like, actually, let's do this. Let me kind of back up for a second, because within the Speaker Lab, we teach what we call the Speaker Success Roadmap. Okay, we've kind of been touching on different parts of it here in our conversation. So let me kind of paint the overall picture, and then we can dive in and specifically on this. But we call it the Speaker Success Roadmap. It makes the acronym SPEAK, SPEAK. And so when someone says, how do I book gigs? How do I get started as a speaker? This is what we walk through. So first of all, S, select a problem to solve. Get clear on who you speak to, what problem you touch on. Be a steakhouse, not a buffet. We talked about that. The P is to prepare your talk. Be really, really clear on what the solution is that you are providing. Solve a specific problem, not just, I just want to speak. No, you're solving a specific problem. So prepare your talk. The E is to establish yourself as the expert. So 2 key marketing assets every speaker needs. You need a website and you need a demo video. Website and a demo video. In this day and age, if you don't have a website, you don't exist. People won't take you seriously. So it's important to have a website and have that demo video. Now, what exactly is a demo video? So think about it like a movie trailer. A movie trailer, they take a 2-hour movie, they boil it down to 2 or 3 minutes. And within those 2 or 3 minutes, you have an idea of who's in it, what's the plot, what's the theme, what's the genre. And the point of the demo video and the point of the movie trailer is to make you want to see more. So you think about for an event planner, a decision maker, a principal, a youth pastor, whoever who's looking at hiring a speaker, they are in the risk mitigation business, meaning as soon as I hire a speaker and I bring them in and I hand them a microphone to talk to my audience, like I'm trusting that they're going to do a good job, that they're going to deliver, that they're not going to say anything inappropriate, that they're not going to embarrass me, that they're going to make me look good. Like I'm trusting those things. So if I don't know who you are and I don't have any type of personal connection or referral or relationship with you, like having some type of video like gives a lot of like confidence and credibility of like, hey, maybe you're a great speaker. You're just not what an event is looking for. So the demo video helps with some of that confidence. All right. So that's the E. The A is acquire paid speaking gigs. Now, this is kind of what we're talking about. And in fact, let me just give you the K, then we'll come back on the A. The K then is knowing when to scale, meaning a lot of people are interested in speaking, are also interested in doing a podcast or writing a book or coaching or consulting or doing a training program of some type. And so we always remind speakers, like you can do all the things, but you can't do all the things at once. Like something's going to come first, something's going to come last. You got to be really clear on how speaking kind of fits into the mix of what you want to do. So let's backtrack back to that A for a second. All right, acquire paid speaking gigs. So again, the point is that you can't just sit and wait. If you build it, they will not come. Like you got your website, your demo video, your mom is thrilled. She's going to tell both of her friends. Nobody else cares. They just don't, right? And so being clear on this is who I speak to, this is the problem that I solve, and then proactively reaching out to event planners, decision makers, conferences, associations, groups that you would be a good fit for. So if I reach out to a conference planner that I know, if I'm speaking, let's stick with the example of you speak to students and you're a student leadership speaker, and you reach out to an event planner for a student leadership conference, you're not trying to convince them to hire a speaker. Like they're already planning on hiring a speaker. Like you're just showing them why you are a good fit. So reaching out can be very, very effective. Letting people like just being much more proactive than reactive, posting something on social media. Hey, I'm a speaker. Like that's great. Like certainly do that. But just throwing up a tweet or a post or something isn't going to move the needle a lot. The best thing that you can do is be proactive and reaching out to people that you probably already know, that you already have some connections with, some relationships with, who may be looking for a speaker or may know of someone who's looking for a speaker. Because if people don't know that you're a speaker, they're not going to think of you. They're not going to recommend you. They're not going to refer you. They're not going to invite you. So starting conversations with people and asking, which I know for some people can be super uncomfortable. It's like, I don't want to do that. I just want to sit back and I wait for the phone to ring. Like, all right, you can do that. You're just going to be waiting for a while. But the best thing you can do is like speaking is very much a momentum business. I had a friend say one time, the more you speak, the more you speak. And so, I mean, I could tell you a bunch of stories of when I spoke of something and someone was in the audience and they heard me and it led to this. And a couple of years later, someone else referred me to that. And then it was repeat business. And then word of mouth from this turned into this other thing. And you kind of have like this spider web of different events that happen. But initially, like you're doing some asking. You're trying to like get this ball rolling here and trying to generate some momentum.
Yes.
We covered a lot of ground there.
We covered a lot of ground there. And I think it's important to understand, like, I love if the more you speak, the more you speak, the more, I mean, so much of this translates outside of speaking. It's, I mean, the more action creates momentum and momentum drives the movement, like all of that. And so, man, I think that's a great place to tie this bow. Where can people find you online? Where can they get, hey, we want the framework. We want to, we'll have all of it linked, but where can people find you?
Yeah, man, this has been a ton of fun. If you listen to this podcast, you probably listen to other podcasts. So we have a podcast called the Speaker Lab Podcast. We've got over 400 episodes there. I mean, anything and everything related to speaking. What do you speak about? How do you find gigs? We talk about demo videos and websites and speaking fees and on the list goes. Using speaking for coaching and consulting, selling books, that sort of stuff. So a lot of information there at the Speaker Lab podcast. Definitely check that out. Also, we've got a book called The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, Building Your Platform. You mentioned that you read the book, checked out the book. So definitely check that out. But yeah, everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com, thespeakerlab.com. A lot of free resources over there, blog posts, that sort of thing. Also, one thing we touched on earlier was the speaking fee calculator. So myspeakerfee.com. That'd be another one that I'd highly encourage people to check out. So yeah, if there's anything I can do to help support, serve speakers, I'm happy to help however I can.
Awesome, Grant. Thank you so much for your time. Before we let you go, we got one more question for you. At Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast, we want to know, what does it mean to be a champion to you?
Yeah, I think, let's go full circle here. And I think what we talked about at the beginning, that one thing when I've done some speaking and one thing I talk about with our team internally a lot is the idea that who you are is more important than what you do. Who you are is more important than what you do. Meaning, Kyle, if you and I are great speakers, podcasters, entrepreneurs, business leaders, fill in the blank, whatever, but like we drop the ball as husbands, as dads, like, man, we're just missing it. And so who you are is more important than what you do. Like we touched on earlier, if we're killing it in the marketplace, but we're dropping the ball at home, like we've really missed it. And so now it doesn't mean you can't have both. Like you can have your cake and eat it too. I've done pretty well in business and entrepreneurship, but at the same time, I'm not going to do that at the detriment of my family. I've got a great marriage. I'm crazy about my wife. I have amazing daughters and an amazing family. And so that's the priority is if you want to be a champion, you got to be a champion with the people that matter the most.
Come on now, be a champion with the people that matter most. That was powerful, Grant. Thank you so much. And thanks for joining the show today.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. Our passion is to talk to successful people and hear all about their journey and what it took to get there. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit up the website at unleashthechamp.com. Find us on Instagram at Kyle J. Sullivan and hit up that Facebook page at Unleash the Champ. Remember, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving.